The clinking of wine glasses, the soft shuffle of forks against porcelain, and the occasional bursts of laughter filled the dining room like a practice performance. It was their anniversary, 50 years of Gerald and Ruth Evans, and the house was packed with relatives, neighbors, and old friends who never stayed long enough to see what happened when the curtains fell. I sat at the far end of the table, exactly where I always sat. Not quite in the frame, not quite out of it. The room was warm with candlelight, the chandelier above scattering soft shadows across the oak table. Kyle, my older brother, held court as usual, retelling stories where he was always the hero. My mother giggled at all the right moments, eyes bright with pride. My father? He didn't even look my way. He hadn't said a word to me since I walked in. Just a tight nod that might have been a blink if I hadn't paid attention. I tried to smile through it. I had told myself this dinner would be different. I had bought a new dress, one that felt like strength, not softness. I had even brought a small gift, an old photo of our family, restored and framed in polished walnut. It sat unopened beside the centerpiece, like I hadn't handed it over an hour ago. I was about to excuse myself quietly when my father's voice cut through the room. "Don't pretend you matter to us." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Slow, suffocating. Then he added, without even turning his head, "You're just here because your mother insisted." Every fork paused midair. My chest tightened. My hands curled in my lap to keep from shaking. But the worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was how normal they felt. Like they were part of some unspoken script I'd memorized since childhood. Like I should have seen them coming. Kyle let out a short laugh, then muttered, "Honestly, we forget you exist half the time." I looked around. No one moved to stop him. No one said my name. The same faces I knew all my life, and not one of them looked surprised. The heat in my chest rose, so quickly I thought I might choke on it. But no tears came. Not this time. Instead, I reached for my glass of water, tapped the rim with the handle of my fork. Once. Clear and deliberate. The room fell silent. Even Kyle's grin faltered. "I won't take much of your time," I said. My voice was steady, almost too steady. "Just 3 sentences." I stood up slowly. My knees didn't shake. My hands didn't flinch. My heart pounded, yes, but it wasn't fear. It was certainty. The kind that only comes when you've been silent for too long. Every eye turned to me now. Even my father finally looked. He raised an eyebrow, like I was about to embarrass myself again. I held his gaze. The first sentence came out quiet, but it landed like thunder. "I have loved this family with every part of me that you decided wasn't good enough." Someone exhaled sharply. I didn't know who. My mother blinked. Her smile faded like a smudge on glass. I let the silence breathe, just long enough. Then I spoke the second sentence. "And after tonight, you will never have to pretend to remember I exist again." Kyle shifted in his seat. My father leaned back, arms crossed. But for the first time, he didn't look bored. He looked unsettled. I didn't say anything else. Not yet. I placed my glass down, turned slowly, and walked away from the table. No one called after me. Not yet. Not until I reached the front door. My mother's voice finally cracked the air, soft, pleading, "Jordan." I didn't stop. My father's fist hit the table with a sharp thud behind me. Cal muttered something, but I was already gone. I opened the door. Cold night air brushed my skin like relief, like release. Then I turned my head just slightly over my shoulder. No drama. No yelling. Just 3 final words. "Take care, because you won't get another chance to take care of me." And I closed the door behind me. The wind outside bit at my cheeks as I stepped off the porch, but it felt less harsh than the chill that had just settled inside me. I didn't have a coat on. I hadn't planned to leave that early. I had planned to stay, to try to be seen. Maybe that was the saddest part. After all these years, part of me still believed there was something I could do to finally earn their love. I walked down the graveled driveway, the stones crunching under my heels like tiny bones. It was the same path I used to run on as a little girl, barefoot, with scraped knees, chasing after Kyle even when he never looked back. I always thought if I ran fast enough I'd catch up, that maybe he'd wait. He never did. That night, memory after memory rose to the surface, uninvited but sharp like glass through skin. I remembered being 10, standing by the living room window, holding a handmade card for Father's Day. I had spent hours on it, drawing a picture of us fishing together, even though it had only happened once. I stood there all day waiting. He never came home. When I asked the next morning where he'd been, he said, "Work comes first. You'll understand when you grow up." But I did grow up, and I still don't understand. I remembered my 12th birthday. My mom asked if we could keep it simple this year. She baked a lopsided cake and bought me a book from the discount bin, while Cal got a surprise party with 20 kids, pizza, balloons, and a brand new bike the year before. When I asked why he got so much more, she smiled tightly and said, "Kyle's more social, sweetie. It's different." I remembered my high school graduation. I walked across the stage in a cheap cap and gown I paid for myself, scanning the crowd for familiar faces and found none. Afterward, I checked my phone, one message from Mom. "Sorry, couldn't get out of work." You understand, right? That was always the expectation. That I would understand. That I wouldn't need. That I would settle for scraps and call it love. I remembered the family vacations I wasn't invited to, the dinners I cooked that were eaten without a thank you, the holidays where my name was misspelled on the card, if it was written at all. I remembered being invisible and still showing up. I had spent so many years trying to earn my place at a table that was never set for me. So many years twisting myself into someone more agreeable, more quiet, less sensitive, less dramatic. But no matter how much I shrank, I never fit. I was either too much or not enough. And yet I kept coming back, hoping, believing that someday something would change, that they would see me, choose me, love me. But tonight had ripped that illusion from my hands and shattered it across the floor. There was no coming back from what had just happened. And strangely, that didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like freedom. At the end of the driveway, I paused under the street lamp, its yellow light casting my shadow long across the asphalt. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like chasing anything. I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to go back and try again. I didn't want to hear an apology or offer one. I just wanted out. I looked up at the house, so warm, so loud, so full of everything I had wanted for so long. And yet, it had never felt like home. Not even once. I turned away. I didn't get in the car right away. I just stood there, hand on the door handle, breathing in the cold night air like it was the first clean breath I'd taken in years. The laughter from inside the house was muffled now, softened by distance and insulation, but not enough to keep it from reaching me. They hadn't followed. Not yet. Part of me had expected someone to rush out, maybe my mom with a shaky apology, or Kyle with some empty half-joke to smooth things over. But no one came. And that silence said everything I needed to hear. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat in the stillness. The engine was off. The world outside was frozen in that eerie stillness only small towns get on winter nights. It was like even the wind was holding its breath. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Not the same girl who used to leave this driveway crying. Not the girl who waited on the porch for a father who never showed. Not the girl who lowered her voice, her needs, her presence to keep peace that never included her. This version of me, she was done. My phone buzzed once. Then again. A text. Probably Mom. I didn't check. I reached over, put the phone in airplane mode, and tossed it into the glove compartment. If it rang again, I didn't want to hear it. Not tonight. Not ever, maybe. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life. And just as I was about to shift into reverse, the front door of the house opened. My mother stepped onto the porch. She was still holding a wine glass, like she'd forgotten it was in her hand. Her eyes scanned the driveway, landing on the glow of my headlights. For a second, just a second, she looked like she might come closer. But she didn't. She stayed right there, backlit by the house she had always chosen to protect instead of her daughter. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she said. Maybe she called my name. Maybe it was just a sigh. Either way, I didn't open the window. I shifted into drive. But just before the wheels started rolling, I let the window down halfway and leaned slightly out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply spoke the third sentence I had promised. Take care of yourselves, because you'll never get another chance to take care of me. Then I rolled the window back up, and I left. No horns, no screeching tires, just the quiet crunch of gravel beneath my tires as I pulled away. I didn't look back, not when my father slammed the door behind my mother, rattling the siding. Not when Kyle shouted something unintelligible from the porch. Not even when the house finally disappeared from my mirror. I drove in silence, letting the radio stay off, letting the weight slide off me mile by mile. It wasn't rage that powered me. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, something heavier, like a stone finally being set down after carrying it too long. By the time I reached the main road, I felt weightless. And for the first time in 31 years, I wasn't wondering what they thought of me. I wasn't hoping they'd reach out. I wasn't waiting for a sorry. I had closed the door, both literally and emotionally, and the click behind me had sounded like a full sentence, a sentence that meant, I'm done. My apartment wasn't much, just a studio tucked above an old bakery downtown, but it smelled like cinnamon in the mornings and quiet at night. And after the noise I'd left behind, that quiet felt like grace. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my purse on the kitchen counter, still in the same clothes from the dinner. My coat hung untouched by the door. I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought the adrenaline would crash and leave me curled on the floor, sobbing for what could have been. But the tears never came. Just a strange, slow warmth, like my body was finally thawing after decades in the cold. I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of my bed, looked around at the space that was entirely mine. There were no family photos on the walls, no heirlooms, no inherited furniture. Just books I loved, messy notes taped above my desk, a houseplant I kept forgetting to water, and a second-hand lamp that cast the room in soft amber light. It didn't look like much, but for the first time it felt like home. The silence was thick, but not heavy, not hostile. It wasn't the kind of silence I'd grown up with, the kind that punished. This was different. This silence was permission. Permission to rest. Permission to be. I curled up under the quilt my college roommate had given me years ago and let the weight of the night settle in. I thought I might sleep restlessly, but instead, I drifted off faster than I had in months, maybe years. The next morning, I made coffee slowly like it was a ritual. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open emails. I just sat by the window, steam curling up from the mug in my hands, and watched the street below come alive. People heading to work. Kids laughing in puffy jackets. Shopkeepers unlocking their doors. The world kept moving. And for once, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. But the ache still lingered, not for them, not really. For the idea of them. For the fantasy I'd clung to, that somewhere deep down, my parents loved me in a way they just didn't know how to express. That if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, they would finally turn toward me. I had spent so long living in that fantasy, I hadn't realized how much it was costing me. That night at the dinner table hadn't destroyed me, it had freed me. Because once the illusion shattered, all that was left was the truth. They didn't see me. They never had. And I didn't need them to anymore. I got dressed and stepped outside into the crisp Vermont air. The city felt different that day, not softer, but less urgent. Like I wasn't racing to catch up to anyone else's expectations. Like I finally had the space to ask, what do I want? I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time I had the question. Later that afternoon, I found myself wandering into a small bookshop I used to love in college. The owner, a woman named Grace, still recognized me. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't mention family or holidays. She just said, "Glad to see you again," and let me browse in peace. I picked up a journal, a simple one. No flowers, no quotes, just a blank cover and empty pages. At home, I wrote the first sentence on the first page. I don't owe anyone my silence ever again. That night, I lit a candle, sat cross-legged on the floor, and wrote until my hand cramped. Not about them, but about me, my thoughts, my fears, my dreams. I didn't need anyone to read it. I just needed to hear myself for once. And in that small, flickering light, something inside me shifted. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was just Jordan, and that was finally enough. A few days passed, then a week. Still no calls, no messages, just the same hollow silence I had always received, only now it felt intentional. And this time it didn't hurt. There was a strange comfort in the quiet, not because it meant anything had changed, but because I no longer saw silence as punishment. I saw it as proof that I had stepped away from something toxic and it hadn't come chasing after me. One evening, I unlocked my phone and opened the family group chat. Still there, still named Evan's Crew. It had been weeks since anyone said a word. The last message was a meme Kyle sent about football. No replies, no reactions, just empty blue bubbles floating in digital space. I stared at it for a while. My name was still listed, still included, but that inclusion meant nothing. It never had. My thumb hovered over the screen, and then, without fanfare, I tapped Leave Group. "Are you sure you want to leave this conversation?" "Yes." The screen blinked. Then it was gone. I exhaled. No trumpets sounded. No dramatic swell of music. Just peace. A soft, honest kind of peace that filled the spaces where guilt used to sit. I had left the conversation years ago. This was just the final click. I made tea, pulled a blanket over my legs, and opened my journal. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote, "Sometimes healing is the absence of noise." Then I opened my laptop and dug through old photo folders. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just following a thread. After a few minutes, I stumbled across a picture I hadn't seen in years. It was from a family barbecue. Some cousin's birthday, I think. In the photo, everyone was crowded around the table, arms around each other, laughing. And there I was, off to the side, sitting alone on the edge of the patio, half in shadow. Forgotten, barely in the frame. I remembered keeping that photo, not because it brought me joy, but because it reminded me of how I had spent my life on the outskirts, always trying to lean in, always hoping someone would wave me over. This time, I didn't just look at the picture. I posted it. No tags, no dramatic caption, just a simple sentence under it. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop sitting where you were never invited to be seen. I hit post, set my phone face down, and went back to folding laundry. It didn't take long. Within an hour, I had messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. A few sent hearts. One aunt simply wrote, "I see you." Another messaged privately, "Took me 40 years to get there too. Proud of you." But from my parents, nothing. From Kyle, nothing. And that silence, it felt perfect, because it was honest. It told me everything I needed to know without saying a word. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a cozy bistro down the street. I brought a book, ordered dessert without shame, and watched the city move around me through the window. I felt like a ghost returning to her own body. Later, as I walked home beneath the soft glow of the street lamps, I realized something. I wasn't mourning the loss of my family anymore. I was celebrating the return of myself. It was a rainy Thursday when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated. The screen lit up again, persistent but soft. Something in my chest shifted. I didn't know how, but I knew it was her. I answered without a greeting. "Jordan." The voice was thinner than I remembered. My mother. There was a pause, like she was waiting for permission to go on. I gave her none. She filled the silence with awkward small talk, asking about the weather in Burlington, about my job, about a bakery we used to visit when I was little. Her tone was light, but brittle, like the wrong word might snap it all in two. Still, she avoided the one thing we both knew she had called for. Finally, after minutes that felt like a balancing act on a broken rope, she let out a sigh. Your father's birthday is coming up. He mentioned you. We're having a dinner. You should come. The invitation hung there, suspended in the static. A lifeline, maybe. Or a test. I looked out the window. The rain had started tracing soft lines down the glass. I imagined their table, the same one where I was told I didn't matter. I imagined the chair where I used to sit, the silence they always reserved for me. I took a breath, then said with a calm so quiet it startled even me, I won't be able to make it. Oh. Her voice cracked slightly. Maybe next time. There won't be a next time. And I ended the call before she could respond. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, letting the rain outside mirror the stillness inside me. That final thread between us had snapped. Not violently, just quietly, like a door that had been left ajar, finally swinging shut. A week later, another unknown number appeared. This one I knew immediately. Kyle. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, maybe muscle memory, went out. Jordan, he said. No preamble. No fake cheer. Just my name, raw and unpolished. There was silence for a beat, and then he added, We were talking about you the other night. I didn't respond. It's weird not having you around, he continued. Mom cries sometimes. I let him speak. Let him sit in the discomfort he helped create. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry, he finally muttered. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. I thought you were just dramatic. That word, dramatic, the label they'd slapped on every tear, every plea, every attempt I ever made to be heard. I almost laughed. Instead, I breathed deeply and said, I'm glad you're realizing it now. A pause. But I'm not coming back. Even just to visit, he asked, small like a boy again. No, I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not that girl anymore either. There was another silence. He didn't try again. Then, in the softest voice I'd ever heard from him, he said, We miss you. I didn't say it out loud, but the truth curled gently inside me like a farewell. You miss the idea of me, not me. Goodbye, Kyle. And I hung up. This time I sat still for a long while, not because I was uncertain, but because I wasn't. The calls had come. The apologies had arrived. The door had creaked open one final time, and I had chosen not to walk through it, not in anger, not in pride, but in peace. And peace, I had learned, was the loudest thing they'd ever hear. The silence didn't end when the calls did. If anything, it grew. But instead of filling it with what-ifs or regrets, I began to plant things inside it, small, steady pieces of a life that was mine and mine alone. I signed up for a watercolor class on Tuesday nights. It had been years since I'd picked up a brush, but the moment I sat at the easel, something inside me softened. I wasn't painting for approval or praise. I was painting for quiet, for joy, for breath. On Saturdays, I visited the farmer's market. I stopped at the same flower stand each week, where an older woman named Margot always tucked an extra sprig of lavender into my bouquet. For calm, she said. And each week I smiled genuinely. My apartment changed too. I added things slowly. A crooked shelf I built myself, soft yellow curtains that made the mornings feel warmer. A rug I found at a thrift store that didn't match anything, but made me laugh. I put up photos, not of people, but of places I'd loved, moments that belonged only to me. A foggy lake in Maine, a city skyline at dusk, a close-up of my hands covered in clay from a pottery class I took on a whim. I started sleeping better, deeper, like my body had finally stopped bracing for impact. There were still moments, of course. Moments when the past tried to claw its way back in, usually late at night, or when I heard a song from childhood, or caught a glimpse of someone who looked a little too much like my mother from behind. Grief didn't vanish. It just changed shape. But now, I let it visit without letting it stay. At work, things shifted too. I stopped volunteering for tasks just to prove my worth. I stopped apologizing for speaking up. I stopped shrinking in meetings. And one afternoon, after presenting a project I'd poured my soul into, my manager looked at me and said, "I hope you know how valuable you are." I smiled and said thank you, but inside I whispered I'm learning. That winter, I hosted my own holiday dinner. Not a grand event, just a few friends who had become family in their own quiet way. We ate potluck style around my little table, candles flickering, jazz playing low in the background. There was laughter, real laughter, and when someone toasted to chosen families, my chest swelled with something that felt like home. No one asked where my parents were. No one mentioned Kyle, and I didn't offer anything. I didn't need to. This life, this messy, imperfect, beautiful thing I was building was enough. I didn't build it out of spite. I built it out of love. For myself. For the girl who had once tried so hard to be seen, and now saw herself clearly for the first time. Some days, I still looked in the mirror and found pieces of her, tucked in the corners of my eyes, curled into my smile. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply grown. She had stepped into a new version of herself, one that didn't need permission to take up space, one that didn't wait to be invited to the table, one that had built her own. And every time I sat at it, surrounded by warmth that was real, by love that didn't ask for performance or proof, I felt it. Not revenge, not even justice, just peace. It arrived on a Tuesday, a plain white envelope, slightly wrinkled, tucked among bills and coupons. No return address, but the handwriting, elegant but trembling, was unmistakable. My mother's. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at it for a long time. My thumb brushed the edge. I didn't feel dread or anger, just stillness. Eventually I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, ink smudged in places. There were no grand declarations, no begging, just a quiet string of words, like someone trying to walk across thin ice without making a sound. She wrote about missing me, about how time had made her reflect, about how things she once thought were small, forgotten birthdays, empty seats, dismissive remarks, had begun to echo in her chest. She said she wished she had been braver, that she had spoken up more, that she had loved better. She said she hoped I was doing well, and that I had found peace. And at the very end, one line stood alone, written in slightly shakier script. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back into the envelope, and then I sat, not overwhelmed, not broken, just present, because I knew that letter wasn't really for me. It was for her, a way to unload a guilt that had finally started knocking too loudly, a release valve for a pressure she'd ignored for decades. And maybe that was enough. But I didn't write back, not out of bitterness, not out of spite, but because I no longer owed explanations to people who had once looked straight through me. I didn't need to help her feel better about what she hadn't done. I didn't need to reopen wounds just so she could understand how deep they had gone. Sometimes silence is the kindest closure. Later that evening, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals beneath the streetlights. The letter rested on the coffee table beside me, untouched, unanswered. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have clutched that letter like a lifeline, who would have read it again and again, dissecting every word, hoping it meant things could go back to the way they were. But I didn't want things to go back. That version of me was gone. And in her place was someone who had survived, someone who had chosen herself. I picked up the envelope and tucked it into a drawer, not to hide it, but to place it where it belonged in the past. Then I lit a candle, the same one I always lit when I needed grounding. And I whispered, not for anyone else to hear, "I'm not angry. I'm free." There was no celebration, no cathartic sobbing, just a quiet acceptance that felt heavier and holier than anything I'd ever known. And in that stillness, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer carry other people's shame. I would no longer make room at my table for those who once told me I didn't belong. I would live a life so full, so rich with honesty and peace that no apology, late or otherwise, would ever be needed, because I had already given myself everything they couldn't, and that, in the end, was the truest closure of all. Months passed, and with every one of them, the distance between me and the life I left behind grew wider, quieter. The chair I once occupied at family dinners, still empty, I imagined. My name, once tossed around as the punchline to jokes, now lingered in awkward silences. The space I left behind didn't just vanish, it expanded, echoed, asked questions none of them could answer. But I didn't have to be there to witness it, because my absence had become its own kind of presence. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. I wasn't angry. I wasn't punishing them. I had simply removed myself from the role they cast me in without my consent. The role of the scapegoat, the outsider, the too sensitive one. And without me, the script no longer worked. There was power in that. More power than I'd ever found in confrontation. More than any slammed door or shouted monologue could have given me. I used to think closure meant mutual understanding. A hug, a tearful apology, a dramatic reunion where everyone saw the light and welcomed me back with open arms. But now I knew better. Closure was choosing not to explain, not to perform, not to hope. It was lighting a candle, cooking dinner for one, and dancing barefoot in my kitchen while the world outside went on. It was taking up space in a life I had built with my own hands, and not looking over my shoulder to see if they approved. One chilly evening, I walked into a quiet cafe tucked between two bookstores downtown, a place where no one knew my name, where no one expected anything from me. I ordered a cappuccino, sat by the window, and watched the world drift past in reflections and raindrops. I stirred the foam slowly, letting the heat warm my palms. No phone in my hand, no ghosts in my chest. I felt whole, not because someone told me I mattered, but because I had stopped asking. Somewhere behind me, a couple laughed. Someone else hummed along to the music overhead. And I, just me, sat still without ache or urgency. The past felt far away now, like an old dream that no longer fit. I didn't miss them. Not really. I missed who I had wanted them to be. I missed the family I'd invented in my mind to survive the one I had. But grief had softened its grip, and in its place was something steadier, gratitude. Gratitude that they had shown me exactly who they were. Gratitude that I had saved myself. Gratitude that the silence I once feared had become my sanctuary. Not long after that, I received another message. A letter, this time from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. She said she heard about what happened. Said people were talking, whispering, wondering, and I smiled, because they could wonder all they wanted. They could spin stories, trade blame, rewrite memories, but the truth didn't live with them anymore. It lived here, in the life I had built, in the voice I had reclaimed, in the space I had chosen, and it spoke loudest in the one thing they could never control, my silence. Sometimes the most beautiful revenge isn't revenge at all. It's walking away so completely that they can't even recognize who you've become. It's living so fully that their absence feels like relief. It's building a life so rooted in self-worth that no one gets to shake it again. And I had done it, not for them, for me. I had finally, fully chosen myself.